The year was 1177. Saladin had not lost a single battle in years. His army, 26,000 strong, was the most terrifying force the medieval world had seen in a generation. Highly trained Mamluk cavalry, hardened Syrian infantry, and elite siege engineers. Saladin had done what every Muslim leader before him had failed to do. He unified Egypt and Syria under a single, iron will. The Crusader kingdoms, broken and bleeding, had no answer for him. Saladin knew it.
We take the city here, my lord. Allah has willed it. It shall be ours.
His generals knew it. And deep inside the walls of Jerusalem, a dying teenager knew it too. Baldwin IV was only 16 years old. Leprosy had been eating him alive since childhood. His fingers were gone, and his face was so brutally disfigured by the disease that he wore a silver mask in public, just to spare his court the horrific sight. He couldn't grip a sword. He could barely sit upright. His doctors had stopped trying to save him. They were just waiting for him to die. His advisors begged him to surrender, to negotiate, to save whatever was left. What Baldwin did instead became one of the most unbelievable events in military history. To truly understand the miracle of Montgisard, you have to realize how close Saladin was to absolute victory. For months, he had been suffocating Jerusalem. No grand battles, just patient destruction. Fortresses fell, trade routes were cut, and the kingdom's treasury was completely empty. Then, in November 1177, Saladin made his final move. 26,000 warriors marched straight toward Ascalon, the coastal fortress guarding Jerusalem. If Ascalon fell, Jerusalem would be completely surrounded. The kingdom would not survive the winter. Baldwin called a war council. The numbers were brutal. The kingdom could barely scratch together 5,000 men, and they were weeks away. Saladin would reach the fortress in days. One advisor said it bluntly, "You cannot fight a battle you have already lost." Then a messenger burst into the room. Saladin's massive army had split up. The main force was still moving forward, but Saladin himself had broken away with 6,000 elite cavalry to raid the countryside. Arrogant and confident that no Crusader force could touch him, Saladin let his guard down. His men were spread out, looting villages and dispersing supply lines. They weren't in formation. They weren't even on alert. Baldwin looked at his generals. "How many men can we gather right now?" The answer was a joke: 500 royal knights, 80 Templars, and roughly 3,000 basic infantry. A total of 3,500 exhausted, undersupplied men, against 6,000 of Saladin's absolute best. It was still suicide, but a different kind of suicide. The room erupted into arguments. The king couldn't ride. His body would literally fall apart on the march. Even if they reached Saladin, they were outnumbered 2-1 by the finest cavalry in the world. These objections weren't cowardice. They were basic math. But Baldwin cut through the noise. "If we don't stop him now," he whispered. "When?" Nobody answered, because there was no answer. This narrow, impossible window was the only shot they would ever get. They rode out at dawn. The brutal night march destroyed their horses. Men were literally falling asleep in their saddles. Baldwin, strapped to his horse because his legs could no longer grip the saddle, pushed his men through the pitch-black darkness. By noon the next day, scouts returned with news that no one could believe. They had found Saladin, camped near Montgisard, just 15 miles from Jerusalem, and they were still completely scattered. Saladin's spies had told him exactly what he expected to hear. Baldwin was stuck in Jerusalem, too sick to move. So Saladin was relaxing inside his command tent, reviewing maps when the screaming started. At first, he thought it was just a camp dispute. Then a scout burst through the tent flaps, his face completely pale. Christians, thousands of them, charging down the ridge. Saladin stepped outside, and his heart sank. Slamming down the slope at full gallop was a wall of Templar knights, their white surcoats covered in dust, iron lances leveled, the ground shaking under the weight of hundreds of warhorses. And right at the center of the charge, impossible, was a silver-masked figure strapped to his saddle, the dying king of Jerusalem. Somehow he was there. Saladin didn't panic. He immediately ordered the war drums to sound, desperately trying to form a line. His Mamluks were elite. They just needed a few minutes to organize. The Crusaders were still 100 meters out. There was still time. There wasn't. Baldwin had given the Templars one simple command: do not stop. the Grand Master of the Templars, Odo, turned to Baldwin right before the charge and said quietly that most of them wouldn't return. Baldwin's response? "Make it count." The Bishop of Bethlehem raised the true cross, the holiest relic in Christendom. In that freezing moment, looking at a force twice their size, something shifted in the hearts of those 3,500 exhausted men. They weren't just fighting anymore. They were witnessing history. The Templars hit Saladin's half-formed center like an iron fist through wet glass. The front line of Mamluks simply ceased to exist. Lances punched through heavy shields and bodies alike. Half-ton warhorses smashed into the lines at maximum speed, crushing everything in their path. The Templar wedge didn't slow down. It didn't turn. It cut straight through the Muslim line like a razor. Right behind them, hundreds of secular knights poured into the crack, tearing it wide open. Chaos took over. Suddenly, Baldwin's 3,000 infantry appeared on the flank, completely hidden until that exact moment. Saladin's veterans, men who hadn't lost a battle in a decade, faced something they had never experienced before, their entire reality dissolving around them. They broke. This wasn't a tactical retreat. This was pure, animal panic. Baldwin, barely conscious from the agonizing pain, watched the enemy collapse from his saddle. His bandages were completely soaked through with blood. The violent ride had reopened every single lesion on his body. He was living on pure willpower. "Forward," he ordered. "Don't let them breathe." The brutal chase lasted for 3 hours. The Templars hunted down the fleeing survivors with mechanical precision. The valley of Montgisard turned into a literal slaughterhouse. The famous Arab historian Ibn al-Athir later called it the worst catastrophe to hit Islam in that entire era. Saladin himself barely escaped, not on a majestic warhorse, but on a racing camel. The humiliation of that image spread faster than the news of the defeat. He arrived back in Cairo with less than 2,000 survivors. His generals, who once thought he was a god, began to doubt him. As the sun went down, painting the bloody valley in deep crimson, Baldwin slid from his saddle. His knights caught him just before he hit the ground. Around them, the dead were piled so high that chroniclers claimed the ravines were filled to the brim. Before losing consciousness, the teenage king insisted on one thing. He led his army in prayer. 500 blood-soaked Templars dropped to their knees in the wreckage and chanted, "Non nobis, Domine, not to us, Lord, but to your name give glory." Some wept. Others just stared at the impossible victory. The Grand Master knelt next to the trembling king. "Your Majesty, you have saved the kingdom." Baldwin's voice was barely a whisper. "God saved the kingdom. We were just the instruments." Then he blacked out. The rewards were massive. Saladin's entire war chest, full of gold meant for months of war, was captured. Thousands of weapons, horses, and supply wagons saved the bankrupt kingdom. Jerusalem celebrated for 3 straight days. But the real prize was time. Saladin would spend the next 10 years trying to rebuild what Montgisard had destroyed, not just his army, but his myth of invincibility. That single decade gave the Crusader kingdoms a lifeline they never should have had. And it all came down to a 16-year-old boy who should have been dying in a bed. Baldwin IV lived for 7 more years. Leprosy finally took him in 1185, dead in his mid-20s. He never truly recovered from that ride at Montgisard. In his final years, he ruled from a litter, unable to move, holding a crumbling kingdom together by the sheer power of his presence. For centuries, historians have tried to explain Montgisard. Christian writers called it a miracle. Muslim writers agreed, seeing it as divine punishment for Saladin's pride. Modern military minds point to tactical surprise and psychological shock. All of those answers are right, but none of them are complete. The real secret weapon at Montgisard wasn't strategy. It was the fact that Saladin, for the first time in his life, fought an enemy who had absolutely nothing to lose. Baldwin knew his fate. He had known it since he was 9 years old. When his tutors noticed, he felt no pain when they pinched his arm. He had spent his youth watching his body fade away, piece by piece. He had already accepted his death. And that made him the most dangerous man alive. Saladin was defending an empire, a reputation, a legacy. Baldwin wasn't defending anything. He was just spending the last few drops of a life he knew was already gone. When Saladin finally conquered Jerusalem in 1193, he achieved his life's dream. Historically, he won. But records show that even on his deathbed, Saladin still thought about Montgisard. He still thought about the impossible battle, and the silver-masked boy who came out of the dark to shatter his world with 500 knights and a wooden cross. Some victories haunt the winners forever. Baldwin IV never conquered new lands. He never expanded his borders. By normal standards, his reign was a tragic failure. But on that one afternoon in November 1177, in a bloody valley called Montgisard, he proved something timeless, that when you have the courage to ride straight into certain defeat with everything you have left, you can rewrite history. 850 years later, we still remember his name, not because of what he conquered, but because of what he absolutely refused to accept.